Gerry, thanks so much for joining me. One of the reasons I was super excited to have you here is that, man, when you talk through your history, which like LinkedIn, by the way, does it no justice because you've been at every size of organization on every type of transaction from M&A, before M&A, after, during. You've
Yeah.
been at IPO, before, after, public, private. Like you might be, sorry to my other CIO friends, but you might be one of the most adaptable and resilient CIOs I've heard of. I want to
Wow.
talk about all of that, but I think a
didn't
fun
know.
place to start is it feels like you checked all the boxes. What would your dream job be now, other than retirement?
And this, I would say this was my dream job 20 years ago. And it remains my dream job. And at the risk of negotiating away my future salary in this dream job, I want to have something to do with professional sports and the analytics and the money ball and I was that guy long before it made a movie. I could even remember arguing on base percentage with a coach when I was in my 20s and I was an assistant coach in baseball, and he just insisted on, if you weren't hitting bombs or batting, in the upper 280s to 320s, it didn't matter that there was a guy on our team who stole bases, walked a lot, got hit a lot, scored a ton of runs, but when it came time to pick the starting lineup, he was rarely in it. So all that to say, if I could be a technology futurist or leader or value creator for any major league sport. And I mean that because I'm also a massive sports fan. So there's why would that be a dream job? Baseball would be the number one, but I'm not that picky. I do Bundesliga.
I love it. Well, there's no shortage of need out there with the amount of data that there's just increasing, both on the field, in the stadium, around the stadium, at
User
home. It's just
experience.
nuts.
I just told you the stats part, but I mean, walking into a stadium, knowing what you ordered the last time you were there, whether you have your kids with you because you bought 4 tickets so we can make an assumption about you. And it's just exciting. And I want in. So for all of those major league sports GMs and presidents that are looking for somebody that could, well, let's just say it still has to pay well. I'm up for that. That'd be the dream gig.
Well, in case the dream job genies are listening, I'll also put my hat in the ring for Formula One. I'll take that same job at Formula One, please. More
Yeah.
Red Bull than Ferrari, just unless they get their strategy sorted out.
Fair enough. I got a little scared about auto racing. As a kid, I loved it. Just too many accidents. I mean, at the time, I wanted to be. We all did. We're driving around. We built on the side of our house. We had a big hill, and we built box cars and raced them down the hill and crashed them and smashed them, and all made out of old bikes and old wagons and things. It was a fun time. But yeah, I've since I like my feet on the ground, and so I'm more of a baseball, soccer, football. And I was a wrestler. So personally, I was a high school wrestler and college wrestler, and that's also another story for another time.
That's great. I feel like there's a through line from building those cars to racing forward to building these teams and pushing forward through all these crazy transactions.
Yeah.
Let's explore some of them.
Sure.
I'd like to hear some stories from the trenches of these, whether it's an acquisition, transition that you've gone through, and something that, like, what's one of the most interesting one that pops out?
If I were to pick the number one, it would have been, so in 2005, Dr. Pepper bottling was merged with Dr. Pepper 7-Up. And someone's going to say, wait, what's the difference? Well, one was the concentrate and brand owner, and the other was the bottler and distributor, and they had been separate for years. And also, they owned Mott's applesauce and Snapple, and Cadbury was actually the owner of all those brands. And And so Cadbury combined them all, and we became part of Cadbury Schweppes. That was 2005. The deal closed in '06. And then in January or February of 2007, right after we had put the teams together, reorganized, started to outsource all of our data centers up to Toronto, the let's call it the corporate raiders came in and said, you know what, we don't like this Cadbury deal.
Oh
And they
man.
tried to split us up, and we headed off at the pass and decided to take our own action, take Dr. Pepper private, and take the juice and the concentrate company, mix it with the soda company and water and tea company, and then let the candy and gum go. And so a year or two into doing merging, we were demerging. They actually the British actually call it demerge, which I thought basically carving it out.
Mm.
We were going to
Like
go
deplaning.
private. Yeah, we were going to go private, and if you remember, 2008 was the bond and market
Oh
insanity,
yeah.
and so suddenly, instead of being a private company, we had to raise public money in order to do the deal. And so a combination of all that business intrigue, but the technical hurdle was massive. Here we are going and shoving all this together, and about the time the surgery and sutures had started to heal, we were going back in and cutting back the brain out and splitting it in half. And so that's the one that really stands out to me. As I remember being in my parents' closet because I didn't want to wake anybody up. It was 4th of July weekend, and I'm talking people through the go, no go.
That had
And
to be exciting.
it was exciting, and throw out the fact that we also had to choose sides and figure out how much IT we were going to get and how much Cadbury was going to get. So it was a real to your point. If ambiguity, chaos, change is something you can't handle, I imagine Jack Nicholson. You can't handle it, and I thrive on it. Always have. Maybe it's because I have 4 brothers and 3 sisters. I don't know.
I'm on the same page with you, very much like-minded. What I'd be curious about is you must have had to get a ton of stuff done in a very short amount of time. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many companies I've been in where they've been trying to consolidate their ERP for who knows how many
Yeah.
years, right? People have been hired and fired, and everyone's lost track of what they were trying to do in the first place.
Yes.
I guess two-parted question, like, how do you get it done that quickly? And then also, like, are there lessons learned on how you can move that quickly when it's not even you don't have a gun to your head?
Well, I mean, like any other plan, we weren't trying to boil the ocean.
Hmm.
So even in the case of putting the 2 companies together, we also sort of had little agreements about how they'd operate until we were together. So we hadn't really yet put the ERPs together.
Hmm.
We had done HR, and so there were certain aspects that were we got to stand up our own HR and payroll, which of course makes sure people get paid is a pretty big deal. But the only real decisions that we had moved forward were all the infrastructure ones: call center, service desk, desktop support, network, telecom, all the data centers. Those had already kind of come together. And so in a way, it wasn't like we got it all done. But now we had a transition services agreement with Cadbury to be able to stay on those systems for 1 year. And that meant separate every contract, separate every outsourcing agreement, make sure that the data centers don't talk to each other, and that there isn't a chance that they can see our data and we can see their data, even though a year earlier we were best buds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the nature of, in a transaction like that, despite the fact that it should have been friendly, at some point the 2 sides get their marching orders, and they're not synergistic. They're actually they're dyssynergies. And so it's managing all that. I was focused on the infrastructure. we had to cut the umbilical cord 4th of July weekend. And if
Oh
we
boy.
didn't, we were in trouble. And so from the moment they said, Gerry, can you take infrastructure? There were people taking ERP. There were people taking HRIS. There were people taking all our analytics platforms. I only had one chunk of it. So I don't want to make it sound like I was the orchestrator of all, but I was in the same, committee, and the project lead was, I was sort of side, you get it, how it works. Governance, everybody came together and worked on their own piece while they made sure that nothing I was doing was messing up their life, and nothing they were doing was messing up or expecting me to deliver on something sooner than I should have.
Mm. We're anytime we're planning, we're always trying to make sure we're not painting ourselves in the corner, but we also don't want to plan for every possible eventuality, because then things just get too complex. Like, like did that teach you to plan for the synergy to become not synergistic? Like, what did it teach you about, flexibility versus painting yourself in a corner from a planning perspective?
Yeah. So I hope, at the risk of contradicting you, I absolutely thought I planned for everything. I mean, I pulled people in the room. We did everything we possibly could, because we knew there would be something we didn't plan for, and it was going to screw up, and we were going to be in trouble. And so, and that there are adages and books and stories and all sorts of things about, you make a plan because the plans are meant to be broken. And more often than I want to admit, they also don't go according to plan.
Yeah.
In fact, we had one, a big one. Am I going to go ahead and tell you this one? I'm trying to, you know what? It's so in the past, no one should have any issues with it. But every time we simulated Cutover, it failed.
Oh boy.
Every time. We couldn't figure out what it was, even though we understood the symptoms. With 48 hours to go, one of our engineers came up with an idea that passed the sniff test. It truly wasn't what we wanted it to be, but it created the problem was, when we separated the systems, there were hard-coded things on our side that still was looking for Cadbury instances.
Oh, I believe that.
And,
I've seen
and
that.
vice versa, And so we had to essentially mock and simulate the conditions that would need to be in place so that when we cut the umbilical cord, the systems would think Cadbury was still there. It was ingenious, but I could hear people telling me, Gerry, my boss was like, Gerry, so help me God, if this does not work. And I was like, I'm telling you, it's the 11th hour. We got to move forward. I'm confident. If it doesn't work, fire me. And she's like, I don't want to fire you, Gerry. I just wanted to know that you're as confident as you possibly can be. And I said, I'm as confident as I can be. The Cadbury guys, not so confident. And they're like, man, Mecca, we're all going to be in a world of hurt if this doesn't work. And of course, it worked fine.
It worked. Oh, I love that. What a great approach to that problem.
Well,
And this was a while ago. Now, something we employ when we're building software is these chaos robots, right? Where it forces things to break all over the place. So you kind of help sniff that stuff out. But
yeah, imagine 2008 trying to figure that crap out.
No, thank you.
Yeah, it's what happens when your mind can be clear because you had a plan for all the stuff you didn't want to worry about. So everything else is clicking. We're doing routing tables and we're updating, we're swapping out gear and we're doing all this stuff to make ready. And this one hurdle kept coming up. And so nonetheless, another moment of, you got to take some risk. If there was something I could have learned back then that I should have done a better job at, and I say this, I don't want to hide things. I have an old, boss that says, don't surprise me. I hate surprises. Bad news doesn't get better with age.
Mm-hmm.
But even though I was telling the business the bad news, I later was told, I would have rather you'd not told me that, It's like, if you were that confident at work, just tell me we got it, boss. And I'm
That's
like, whoa. Yeah. So,
it's funny finding that balance. That
yeah.
kind of leads me to the next thing, which
Yeah.
is then that's you to the company. But then what about your team? Like you love risk, or you
Yeah.
lean into risk. You love a little bit of the disruptive nature, but that's not everyone, right? How do you
Yeah.
keep your team moving forward through all that change?
Wow. Some of it would be inspiration and just coaching them.
Mm,
Others would just be track record. Of course, you don't have a track record. You don't have one that you can bring to the table. But by this time, 2005, I'd been an IT leader for a long enough time and had a few skins on the wall. I mean, I haven't talked about the mergers and the buys of all the bottlers prior to the Cadbury acquisition, or when I
mm,
was in oil and gas. I didn't even intend to get into mergers and acquisitions. I was on a project and somebody needed people. And they called me up and said, "Hey, Gerry, we're going to buy Louisiana Land and Exploration," which was a oil and gas company in Louisiana. "And would you go do the due diligence?" What do you tell them? No, So I jumped on a plane and I took a team and we did that. But that was where I cut my teeth on this whole how to do all these things and what's predictable and what's not. Like you said, I wish I had all the bots and tools that I can do to simulate now that I didn't have back then. But that only readies you and gives you an appreciation for what the heck we can do today if we need to.
what a great lesson in just saying yes to those new opportunities.
That's for sure.
I've been at so many clients when pre-acquisition and people get nervous, and I'm like, guys, this is probably one of the best opportunities you're going to have in your career. You're going to learn so much from this, right?
So to that end, the inspiration point, I glazed over it, but I said, guys, do you realize how much value is going to be on your resume when you do this? And I reuse that one a lot. That's a
Mm,
little unfair, but like going through COVID with a brand new company having to cut staff 44%
it's
and
rough.
still somehow make the revenue numbers in order to stay afloat through COVID so that when we could come back to work, and in most cases we didn't even come back. We were still a remote. That's another life. A whole that's the data scan story.
you, that building on the people thing, I kind of
Yeah,
want to go in a little bit of a different direction from the M&A, and
yeah.
and I'd love to talk because you've also just been, not just, but you've also been steady state or kind of steady state, CIO, and you've had long running initiatives, and
Hmm.
and what I always come up against, and what I'm interested in is it can be a real challenge selling the business on the investment in modernization. The
Hmm.
ROI can be hard to quantify, and then vice versa. It's a two-part question. It's also tough to get the team aligned around that ROI for over a long running initiative because they can lose sight of it over years. So I guess first part of the question: how do you sell the ROI of modernization to the business, and then how do you keep the team aligned?
It's too broad. I mean, in some cases, so in the case of Dr. Pepper bottling, we we waited so long to digitally transform that by the time I was selling it, it was almost like if we don't do it, we're going to die.
Mm.
So and that's not uncommon in I'll call it in the distribution and pennies per case or pennies per unit margin companies because they're going to sweat it as long as they can.
Mm.
Now turn around and look at somebody like oil and gas. I mean, my entire budget at Dr. Pepper for IT was less than just the data budget for buying 3D seismic information in the oil and gas business. So in one case, you've got somebody saying we've got to digitally transform, which is the best way to do it, and you're in there negotiating the best software and the best technology and the best roadmap and how we can stay ahead of the curve and what's going on in the marketplace and pitching them on the investment.
Mm.
In the case of Tropicana, it's a carve out from Pepsi. they're getting no IT, they're getting no people, they're getting no anything. So you've got a green field. So you can look at today's market and go, to heck with upgrades, to heck with the fact I'm going to go out and I'm going to put it in the cloud from the get-go. I'm going to certainly still do a bake off on all the different technologies, but they're all going to be cloud enabled and platforms and software as a service. And man, that was I shouldn't say easy. I still called on people I trusted, said, come join me. This is what we're doing. Once I said, this is what we're doing, they were like, how can you get me in there? And, of course, it had to be the right deal for them at the same time. So I pinched myself. I remember actually using that when we stood up in front of the new leadership at Tropicana and said, look, this is a total pinch me moment. In the dream job category.
Yeah.
Except I wasn't necessarily thinking this is what I wanted to do. Every time I'd done a transformation, it had been from something to something. In this case, it was build it from scratch. Don't make any of the mistakes you ever made, if you can. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, no lie, there turned out to be things we had to replicate that we didn't want to. Architecture and technology that presented a hurdle that couldn't be updated fast enough. That mentioned earlier, the transition services agreement. While we were part of Pepsi, we had to pay them and continued. It's not, in fact, the Tropicana TSA is still going on till the 1st of January or middle or late of January. I'm giving information out that I think most people know publicly, so hopefully I haven't said anything I shouldn't. But net, that's money we're paying. Like I'm still there. Tropicana is paying to Pepsi to run their IT whilst we build our own. So you had to go out and sign outsourcing agreements with everybody, shared services agreements with everybody, all the software licensing, SAP, HR systems, carve buildings in half. We had real estate. We were conjoined. We had to turn off this system and move over here and get their stuff out of here. It's every one of them is a challenge. So at the risk of making it sound like build it from scratch was easy, it still had pitfalls and still has them. Every once in a while, I get a phone call from one of my former team going, dude, I can't believe what you left. I was like, sorry, dude, it's the way it is.
I'd be curious if you could keep me honest on this one, then validate it a little bit. As in some of our clients, they've been leaders in digital since the beginning, and some are more industries that haven't traditionally invested, like manufacturing and in BevAlc. And I've had conversations with them where they're looking at some competitors and they say, "Man, so and so, they're like 10 years ahead of us. How much harder is it going to be for us to catch up?" I was like, man, since you're starting from scratch, you're like 2 years ahead because you get to just do everything from new. Right. You think that's right?
I would totally agree with it, because in the end, okay, our biggest issues were trying to get master data from the former company that was clean enough to be Tropicana only data.
It's always the data.
Yeah, always the data. That was said from the very beginning. I said, if we don't get our data right, it's gonna be miserable. Then the rest is, try to find the outliers, the real customizations that could potentially be both an albatross and a moment of transformation. Because I couldn't believe some of the stuff that we were doing that was really Band-Aids, because the Tropicana business, and this is kind of to the argument of why Tropicana is going to be wildly successful, is, in all due respect, Pepsi is a soda and chip company. They tried juice. They did it okay. There's other pressures, but nonetheless, focusing on juice, Tropicana is going to be successful. And there were some unique technologies that were built to bridge the gap between what Pepsi was doing and what Tropicana was doing. And those things are they're hugely important to be done right, and the roadmap to getting them where they need to be won't coincide likely with the day the ERP gets turned on for everybody, but it'll be on the heels of it. It's just a bigger transformation than maybe we estimated.
Interesting. And then coming back to that second half of the question, on these long running initiatives,
Mm-hmm.
I find sometimes people like they're getting bogged down in the issues of the technologies, the day to day. And it's like sometimes like I'll step in, it's like, does anyone even remember why we're doing this and like what the whole point is? And I wonder what lessons you've learned there and how you keep them on track.
Yeah. Well, I said a little bit of it there. From day one, that's really not right. I was the first employee in IT, and probably one of the first that wasn't an existing Pepsi employee. And so our CEO joined a couple of months later, but even before then, with Patrick Cluttis and some of the other team that was there from the Pepsi side, we all got on board with what the opportunity was going to be able to be a juice company, and that's all we cared about. And the more we could push out of people's minds when we were with Pepsi it was this way, or when it used to be this way, and that rallying call, and that we can be different and we can be agile and we can make this happen, built a culture of owners. Tropicana is private, so a good chunk of the leadership, and I mean a really good sized group, is an owner.
Very simple rallying cry and a culture of owners. I love
Every
that.
time you have something you're doing that doesn't drive value to the ownership, and you reduce your invested capital and reduce your operating expenses, and I hate it is all about the money, but at the end of the day, it's not all about the money. It's looking and seeing that if we just spent the money properly, we would be in all these other outlets and we'd be able to do all these other things. And that became a pretty easy story to motivate people.
Yeah.
Now,
Motivate, and I would assume keep prioritization kind of
for sure.
easy too.
I
Yeah.
mean, imagine you go into the office. What am I going to do today? I know. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
There are certainly companies that I could remember a story, and I won't even mention the company, where a guy had gone in to do a audit on them like 6 years before, and there were people that were just sitting around, very much like the office space, where they just kind of droned through this work and just keeping their head down, and then going to do an audit again, and the same people are still sitting there. That's mind-boggling.
Drive me crazy. I
You
wouldn't
know,
be able to deal.
and for sure, working for a company that put soda in bottles and put caps on, and worked in the warehouse myself, wrapping pallets and riding along with truck drivers. I can't imagine just sitting there and say, let me keep my head low and hope nobody notices me and I can still get a paycheck. I mean, that just blows my mind. And it certainly wasn't that way at Tropicana when I left. And I'm sure they've still had struggles, because you've got to make the numbers.
Man, I am with you. And I could talk with you forever, same as last time. We might need to do a part 2 sometime in the future, because I
I'm so
love it.
sorry. Yeah.
I really appreciate this, Gerry. And I always like to finish these on a fun note, which is,
Okay.
what's the best advice you've ever received? Life, work, anywhere.
Wow. Best advice I've ever received. You can't take it with you. I'm not there yet to worry about it, but I certainly kind of aspire to that. I met a gentleman who, made a bunch of money working for Xerox, and was real practical and saved it all, and worked his tail off, and looked up at his mid-30s and go, what have I done? I've stocked all this money. I'm not married. I have no kids. Man, I should have just lived my life. And so that's my best advice I ever heard. You can't take it with you.
Hey man, you talk about a simple rallying cry and prioritizing things, and that one will do it for you, I'd imagine.
Well, I'm a big believer in giving back. So when I say you can't take it with me, I'm not saying give it away, but find the charity or the organizations that mean the most to you. Volunteer, of course, but I'm a big United Way guy. I'm a big Scottish Rite Hospital for Children, Boy Scouts of America. I think you have to sort of have. You mentioned it early, an ROI. I kind of have an ROI of my philanthropic activities. If I can see groups are taking the money and they're doing something really good with it, I am all in. The thing that drives me nuts, and I say this not like they're all this way, but the GoFundMe page of the week for some cause that doesn't look like it has any sustainability except it tugs at my heartstrings is not the place I want to put, let's say, big money.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like I said, you can't take it with you. Is my guidance for today. I
I
guess.
love it, Gerry. I love it. It's perfect. Again, thank you so much. Loved having
My
you here.
pleasure, George. Good to talk to you, and let me know if you ever want to do it again.